Welcome back. This is the Atlanta Sports Podcast. My name is Frankie Maloof, and I'm joined by Luke Winstel. It is Wednesday, July 13th. Thank you for finding us on iTunes or Google Play. You can also check us out on our website, atlantasportspodcast.com. And we're going to have a good show today. We're going to get into the last week in review between everything going around in sports around the city of Atlanta. So we'll start off with the Braves, their recent transactions. They DFA'd Emilio Bonifacio to free up a 25-man roster spot for Gordon Beckham. And Luke, what does that mean?
Well, this means several things. The meaning's actually a lot deeper than most people think. They did need that immediate 25-man roster spot. Gordon Beckham coming up from his rehab assignment after he was on the DL for a hamstring injury. So that's your immediate idea. Also, designating Emilio Bonifacio for assignment is not just because he was hitting very poorly. It also opens up a 40-man roster spot. That could be used in many ways. You can add a player from the minors and then eventually call him up. Or, what I think it could have been done for, is when Hector Olivera comes off the MLB restricted list after his suspension ends on August 1st, he'll have to be on the 40-man roster. So that's just opening up a spot for him to come back.
Yeah, hopefully he turns out as good as he was supposed to be. We definitely paid a lot for him. The Braves also signed Omar Infante. You might remember him from a few years ago. When he went to the Royals, he provides infield depth and potential trade or throw-in bait. He hit .236 for the Royals this year, so they let him go.
Yeah, he could be a good backup option if he continues good hitting. He's hitting over 300 in Gwinnett so far, so that he could fill that 40th roster spot if something interesting happens.
But the Braves, anything can happen, as we've known.
Yeah, and by interesting, I mean a trade, most likely, or a cut.
Moving to the minor leagues.
Yeah, so with the minors, we have, what we decided to do was to give kind of our mid-season awards for a pitcher and a player, whoever we think is performing the best. This is based partially off statistics and the other part off of what people who have seen them in person are saying. I've seen the Gwinnett players in person, and we also go off what other writers say. So we're going to start with the AAA team, Gwinnett Braves. Our pitcher of the half season is Steven Janis. He's 2-0. He's got a 1.80 ERA. He's a reliever, so we may see him in the Braves bullpen because we know it's kind of a revolving door this year as it was last year.
Very true.
And our player is Daniel Castro. He's on the 40-man roster. He was up with the Braves earlier this season. He started off hot but ended under 200, then was optioned to the minors when Jace Peterson was called back up. So he's slashing 310, 338, 437. So the AA team, the Mississippi Braves, their pitcher of the half season is Jason Hirsch. He was with Gwinnett for about half the season last year. He did okay, but now he's back down in Mississippi to refine his craft. His stats are, he's 3-2 with a 2.40 ERA. He's done that over a considerable amount of innings, so that's definitely good to hear about him. Our player was Ozzie Albies, who's hitting 400, slugging 550, and he is on base 46% of the time with a 462 on base percentage. Those are insane stats for those of you that do not pay much attention to the stats. So he's definitely just asking for a call-up.
Well, he's only been there for a couple of weeks. He just was brought down to be with Dansby Swanson.
But he was there earlier in the season before he was called up in the net. So moving on, this is the last team we decided to give minor league awards for. The High A Carolina Mudcats. The pitcher was Evan Phillips. His stats are 2-2, record with a 1.27 ERA. That's very, very good. And the player was Joey Meneses, and he slashed 333, 490, and 401. So those are also very good stats. He'll probably be called up fairly soon, if not at the end of the season. And also, an interesting note, since it is All-Star Weekend, there was the Futures game, which is very cool to watch because there's a lot of prospects that you'll see in a few years. So Dansby Swanson represented the Braves in that game.
Yeah, and then in the real All-Star game, the Braves only had one representative. It was Julio Teheran, which brings us to the question some of you may be wondering. What about Freddie Freeman? So, was Freddie Freeman an All-Star snub? And the other thing, should the MLB quit that every team is represented in the All-Star game? Freddie, he was hitting 286 with a 373 on-base percentage. He had 16 home runs.
Which leads the team.
He did start off a little bit slow, which is the reason he's only hitting 286. But Julio Teheran was the one selected from the Braves. He is pitching with a 2.96 ERA. He's only 3-8 though. He has 107 strikeouts to 25 walks. So, I mean, you could have gone either way on this one. Honestly, neither one of them really should have been on the team. Neither one of them had a great year, a great first half of the season. Should the MLB quit the every team represented in the All-Star game thing?
Well, yeah, I think they should, just because you have some players that are more deserving, and you have to not let them into the All-Star game in order to get someone from the Braves or the Athletics or a team that's not really very star-studded right now, So I don't really like that, although it is nice to know that at least one Brave was selected, so we have somebody to talk about. Yeah, you can see
the flip side of that, too.
Yeah, it's good for a rebuilding team like us. But those stats, I mean, I think they probably could have found a better pitcher than Teheran, but they just thought that a 2.96 ERA was better than hitting 286. Most of the guys in the All-Star game are either hitting over 300 or hitting over 20 home runs.
Yeah, so either one of them, but honestly, neither one of them should have made the team, in my opinion. So another question, was the first half of the Brave season a total waste?
Well, the stats kind of show that it was.
Yeah, they're 31-58, the worst record in the major leagues. Their batting average is worse than the majors. They are hitting .237 as a team, which is just a tick behind the next team, the New York Mets. Their home runs, they have 55 home runs, which is 30th again, last.
Dead last.
For those of you that don't remember how many teams there are, their 30th is the worst, and the Rays somehow managed to be last in two of the more important offensive categories. Their fielding percentage is 23rd. That's not too bad. It's 982.
So 98% of the time they're getting them out.
Yeah.
They're fielding the ball clean.
They have 60 errors, which is the 7th most, which isn't too good. So the fielding could use some work. And their team ERA is 4.32. It's not awful. It's decent. Yeah. It's 14th in the majors.
Yeah, and that ERA, it's good for a rebuilding team, but bad for a team that's centered around pitching. But since we're centered around pitching and rebuilding, it's respectable to be right in the middle of the pack, especially when you don't know who's going to be pitching the next day, outside of Julio Teheran.
And they have 39 quality starts, which is good enough for 17th in the majors.
Okay, so what direction are the Braves headed in? I think they're starting to get younger. They're getting the old guys out. Just some recent examples: trading Jason Gurley, trading Jules Chassin. I can never pronounce that name right, but those of you that follow the Braves know what I mean. Trading those two for just not great prospects. Designating bullpen reliever Alexio Gondo for assignment. They're getting younger. They called up Mauricio Cabrera. They're bringing up the young guys to replace the old ones. So I think there's going to be a lot of trades at the trade deadline. Maybe not a lot, but a few to get some of the veterans out. And if they can't trade them, they might cut them with the ones that are not performing well. And another question that a lot of fans are probably thinking right now: when will the Braves' top prospects be here? Because it's pretty hard to hear about a baseball team that's 31-58, losing terribly.
Especially when they were supposed to be a little bit better this year.
How's that working out for you, John Capalella? But when we check out the MLB.com estimated time of arrival for our top 10 prospects, it kind of lets us know that our top prospects are going to be here in the next couple of years, and that's always a good sign. We're not 5 years away from our prospects coming up. It looks like we're about 1 or 2 from top. So I'll just read through this list. Number 1 prospect Dansby Swanson is expected to arrive in the majors in 2017, possibly the beginning of 2016, but that would take a lot of roster movement. Number 2 prospect Sean Newcomb, expected to arrive in 2017. Number 3 prospect Ozzie Albies, expected to arrive in 2018. Number 4 prospect Colby Allard, expected to arrive in 2019. Number 5 prospect Tuki Toussaint, expected to arrive in 2018. Number 6 prospect Austin Riley, expected to arrive in 2019. The 2 that were expected to arrive in 2019 were just drafted very recently, either last year or the year before. Number 7 prospect Tyrell Jenkins is already in the majors. Number 8 prospect Manny Banuelos has played in the majors last year and is hoping to get back this year as he's coming off the DL. Number 9 prospect Max Fried, who's playing with the Rome Braves right now, is expected to arrive in 2018. And prospect Lucas Sims, he's the number 10, is expected to arrive in 2017. So a lot of those were 2016, 2017, with a few 2018s. But it'll be about 2 years when the prospects are up, and then probably about 4 until we're contending.
You got to remember that just because we have the number 1 farm system, not all of them are going to turn out.
Yeah,
you might get 2 or 3 out of 10.
And we'll be lucky if one of them turns out to be good out of every 3.
That would be considered good. So one other thing that we wanted to bring up, there was an article I read one time. I found it back on SI.com. It's on SI.com/vault. It was talking about the similarities. Not similarities yet. We're going to compare the similarities between the Royal system and the Braves. It was talking about the Royal system. Now, you might remember the Royals won the World Series back in October. They used to be bad. This article starts off talking about before cars could fly. Now, obviously, cars aren't flying now. We all know that. And it tells about how you have to go back to 2011 when the Royals were dismal that year. It says they were dismal the year before that, and the year before that, and the year before that, and you get the idea. The Royals are the perfect example for what the Braves are looking to be right now, because the Braves are dismal this year, and there's no getting around that fact.
Dismal last year, probably going to be dismal next year. Sorry to be negative, but it's just how it is.
So this is just saying that it goes on to say before Eric Hosmer had his batting titles, and it goes on and on. So we decided we were going to compare some of the Braves players of the future for the next 5 years or so in what the Royals players are, the starting lineup for this year.
Yeah, and some of these guys you may not have heard of. The catcher we put in there, there's not a lot of catching in the system, and the catchers that are in the system are not performing very well in their low-A rookie teams, so that wasn't very inspiring. So we threw, as our catcher, just as a note, Abraham Gutierrez, who was our international signing. He's 16, so obviously this is like future. This is not next year.
It'll be 4 years or 5 years maybe.
Yeah, and some of the other guys are just prospects that we think could prosper.
But on the Royals side, Salvador Perez, you may have heard of him. He just hit a home run last night in the All-Star game. He's the Royals catcher. He grew up in their farm system, along with Eric Hosmer, who also was in the All-Star game last night. He was the MVP, if I am correct.
Yes.
He also hit a home run. Then Whit Merrifield. He was not the starter in the World Series last year, I do not think, but he is a starter now. He was also in the system. Then they have Alcides Escobar. He was not in the Royal system, but he is starting there. Mike Moustakas. He's a third baseman for the Royals. He was in the system as well, along with Lorenzo Cain, Alex Gordon, and Paulo Orlando. All of them are outfielders. So you can see the Royals have a pretty set lineup. Obviously, they had some injuries this year, which prevented them from being as good as they were hoping. But for the majority of those guys, they were on the World Series team last year. They had a ton of success, and they all were in the farm system. So the future looks bright for the Braves, who also have Freddie Freeman at first. It looks like Ozzie Albies at second, Dansby Swanson at short, Rio Ruiz at third, Malik Smith, Ender Inciarte, and Dustin Peterson in the outfield.
Now, a couple of those positions, I just want to put this out there. At third base, if you look immediate future, Rio Ruiz, if he keeps his excellence in Gwinnett up. But that could change. We have another third base prospect, Austin Riley with the Rome Braves. He's hitting well down there. Albies and Swanson and Freeman all look like that's going to be Three of our four infielders of the future. Again, the catching position is up for grabs. We have three top catching prospects. Whoever gets it will get it, but they're all in the low minors. In the outfield, Dustin Peterson, just because there's not a lot of outfield hitters. Peterson's an average hitter for power. He'll hit maybe 12 home runs a year. Also, Malik Smith, we're still not sure about, although he's done some nice things so far. But everybody else looks like a lock in NCRK. Yeah, it looks like a lot for the future.
So the future looks bright for the Braves. Do not give up hope yet if you're a Braves fan. Wait a few years. If it's still bad, then maybe. But give it a few more seasons. Give it a few more seasons.
So now we're going to move on to the Hawks. They've had a very interesting last week. We'll start off with the Summer League. Our top performers have been Bryce Cotton, Kevin Pangos, DeAndre Bembry, and Tarian Prince. Bembry and Prince are our two first-rounders, so you shouldn't expect anything less than excellence from those two. Prince was unable to play for a little while because the trade officially wasn't through, but he played his last game, I think it was played his first game, sorry. I think it was 2 nights ago. He had a nice performance. Pangos and Cotton are not expected to make the team, but they could definitely give it a run. They both had high points totals. So now moving on to some Hawks transactions. They signed point guard Jared Jack to a 1-year minimum contract. So what I think of that is that he is a solid backup and he's insurance for Dennis Schroeder when Dennis goes Dennis, basically. When he's either crazy, erratic, or not having a good game, you always have Jared Jack that could step in there. Coming off a torn ACL, but in the 32 games he played before the torn ACL last year, he averaged 13 points a game, so that was fine. Another signing they made is they signed Chris Humphries to a 1-year, $4 million deal, so he'll provide rebounding and solidify the bench. Another note, Dwight Howard's changing his number from 12 to 8. And some pros are signing Dwight Howard. Second best defense has just gotten better. He's a floor spacer because you have to guard him. He rebounds well, so that'll help us match up with Cleveland if we meet them in the playoffs. And also some cons to him. His attitude, he's selfish, doesn't care at times. So just take whatever side you want. Dwight Howard says he wants to be coached and all that. So we'll see how that turns out. So with those two signings, the Hawks roster is at 17 men. So the Hawks waived Lamar Patterson to get the roster down to 16, and Mike Scott pleads not guilty to felony drug charges, and he's facing up to 25 years in prison. So obviously, if he's in prison, he won't be on the roster. So that could be what trims us down to 15 men.
And it is that time of year again. Football is just around the corner. We'll just give you some quick dates. We'll start with the Falcons. The team reports July 27th for training camp. Their first preseason game is August 11th against the Redskins. Then they have their 4 preseason games. Then the first regular season game is against the Buccaneers, September 11th. Then moving to a little bit of college football, Georgia starts their first game. They play North Carolina in the Georgia Dome, September 3rd. The Dogs are coming off a 10-3 season in which they fired their head coach. It'll be interesting to see how new coach Kirby Smart breaks in and what they do at the quarterback situation. Georgia Tech, coached by Paul Johnson, they went 3-9 last year. A little bit disappointing for them. They get to go to Ireland. They're in Dublin, Ireland. They play Boston College September 3rd. Then Georgia State, their first game is versus Ball State, September 2nd. The Panthers were 6-7 last year, and they went to their first bowl game. They're looking to build off of that. And Georgia Southern, their first game is against Savannah State, September 3rd. They were 9-4 last season. That just about does it for this episode of Atlanta Sports Podcast. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you'll join us next week for another show.